we are very excited that you guys are here tonight. I can't thank you guys enough for spending your evening with us. So thank you guys. Really appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our objectives. This is a series that we've had, and like I said, if you missed the other series in this particular opportunity for virtual showmanship, we'll share that link again a little bit later. So that's kind of the discussion format. We're going to go through some really cool things, talk about training and grooming. We've got a video to show you and talk about different points of poultry showmanship tonight, different things that you guys need to show. Then we're going to talk a little bit about you as an exhibitor, and then we'll answer with questions and answers. So let me introduce our wonderful presenters tonight. We've got Miss Samantha Lawman from Minnesota, the University of Minnesota. She's an extension educator in 4-H, a wonderful woman to be working with. And then we have our very own Sarah McNaughton, who is here in Cass County, North Dakota, and she is a 4-H Youth Development Extension Specialist. So we are very grateful for their expertise in poultry showmanship, and we are excited to hear what they have to say. So I am going to go ahead and turn it over to these wonderful women.
Awesome, thank you, Leanne. So like she'd mentioned, my name is Sarah McNaughton, and I grew up showing poultry in the 4-H program, so I'm very excited to get to share with you guys today. So here's a few things we're going to be going over in this presentation. We're going to talk through the different varieties and species of birds that make up the 4-H poultry program. We'll talk about the process of selecting your new project, the importance of testing your exhibition poultry for disease and how to comply with animal safety laws and guidelines. And we're going to cover some nutrition basics on properly feeding your project. We're going to go through preparing your animal for the show ring with training and grooming, go over bird appearance and disqualifications, watch a little bit of a video on proper bird handling and showmanship, going over how to best present yourself as an exhibitor, and finally we'll go through some questions and answers at the end. Here we go. So first off, why should you guys all be showing poultry? So I might be a little bit biased, but this project is one of the best livestock species where you can super easy to start from scratch. You don't have to have acres of space or have barns or shelters like you would for larger animals. So because of this, it's very easy to start in both urban and rural settings. Right here in the city of Fargo, North Dakota, they just raised our urban chicken limit to 6 birds. And of course, if you and your family live rural or on a farm, it's even easier to get started in this project. There's minimal equipment needed, which we'll talk about later on in the presentation, minimal experience, and as long as you do your research and talk to your extension agent or project leader, it's very easy to raise poultry. We talked briefly about how there is a minimal amount of space needed, and chickens in particular are easy to house in a small backyard coop, depending on how many you choose to have. And there's a pretty low startup cost to these. The largest expense would be the coop or housing, and the animals themselves, especially if you purchase them as chicks, are commonly under $10 or even $5.
All right, so as Leanne kind of introduced too, my name is Samantha Lawman, and I work just right across the river from Sarah and Leanne in the Minnesota side with Minnesota 4-H and Extension. So we'll start off, we're going to talk a little bit about the species that make up the poultry project, because a lot of times when we're talking about poultry, we immediately think chickens or we immediately think ducks, but there's a huge range of poultry that can be shown. So some of those, and these will vary depending on the state that you live in and the state that you're from. We have chickens, ducks, geese, turkeys. Some states allow for pheasants. Most now have pigeons and dove classes, even quail, and then even more common now we're starting to see guinea hens as well. And if your state is really kind of on the cutting edge, some states are now starting to allow things like heritage classes. So if you have some of those more unique breeds like Icelandic birds or some of those older heritage varieties, there's even a place for you to showcase now in our 4-H program. So before we even think about going into poultry showmanship and competing with the poultry project, we have to think about selecting our poultry and what it means to us and why we want to select a certain type of poultry, a certain species of poultry. So there's kind of three questions we really want to ask ourselves when we're starting a poultry project or kind of getting involved in poultry. And the first is, what's going to work best for you, or what works best for me? So how old am I? What experience level do I have? Am I really familiar with poultry because grandma and grandpa always raised chickens and mom and dad have always raised chickens? Or is this something that's going to be totally brand new and foreign to me? And then what types of poultry can I handle and safely control? Some of us, our favorite birds are going to be those gigantic, fluffy, like buff Orpingtons and Cochins, but those are going to be a little tough if we're a little young yet. Those are a little harder for us to hold in our arms and our hands. Same things when we think about geese or turkeys. Sometimes those are better left to those that are maybe a little more experienced, or just as you get older, you can kind of advance. The second question you're going to want to ask is, what works best for my family? We all know that 4-H is totally a family experience. You're going to spend a lot of time with mom, dad, aunts, uncles, foster parents. Anybody is really going to contribute and help you with this project area. So think about kind of their needs as well. So what is our family goal in raising poultry? Are we hoping that we will have fresh eggs all winter long? Are we hoping that at the end of the year we're going to butcher and enjoy a turkey for Thanksgiving? Do we just want something that really looks beautiful and hangs around the yard and is something fun for us to enjoy? So start kind of thinking about that and have that family discussion. What can we safely raise in our setting? As Sarah mentioned, here in Fargo, North Dakota, which is a fairly populated city, we now allow chickens to be raised right in your backyard. Certainly, they wouldn't want louder birds like geese or turkeys or peacocks or things like that, but we can safely and easily raise smaller things like leghorns or bantam birds or call ducks in a more confined and smaller space. And then the last question for your family is, what do we feel that we can invest in? We all know that some of our 4-H projects or some of these birds are a bit more expensive than others. Some of our Cornish crosses or our market type are a lot more inexpensive and they're more of a short-term project. And some of our larger or more investing projects like pairs of breeding doves or breeding pigeons that we're going to keep for years can be a little bit more expensive. And that last question is, what can I exhibit in my state? So some states allow you to show birds for years and years and years over and over. North Dakota is one where you can show birds over a year old. Minnesota, however, the birds need to be hatched in the current year, except for doves and pigeons. So it's all going to depend on what your state allows. So after you've kind of gotten an idea of what you really want to show, because everybody has favorites. I loved seeing the comments roll in on everybody's favorite breeds. Everybody has something they really love. Maybe it's a color or something like that that you're really excited about. One of the best ways you can figure out some more information about that particular type of breed, or maybe that variety if you've got your eye on a specific color or a feather pattern, is some of these resources here. So the American Poultry Association is what kind of oversees all of the registered breeds in the United States. So the book that you can see on the screen there on the PowerPoint, that's called the American Standard of Perfection. And this is a very thick, very heavy textbook, glossy pages, lots of bright pictures, and it tells about every single breed that's recognized in the United States. So it'll tell you what colors you can have of that breed, how much they're going to weigh, how tall they're going to be, some of the characteristics of them. So this book you can purchase online, but you can also go to the American Standard of Perfection website, which we listed up there at the top, and all that information can be found there as well. And then some of our bantam breeds are broken out, and we talk more about those on the website for the American Bantam Association. And then we also have the NPA, which is the National Pigeon Association. And all three of these resources can really help you either find a breed that you really want to raise and start, or it can help you learn more about the breeds that you already have.
Okay, so jumping on in here to our equipment requirements. There's a lot of different equipments, but a lot of them are optional depending on what you choose to do. So first off, we'll go through, and the leg bands can either be purchased online or in store. We're actually going to chat a little bit more on details on leg bands in a little bit. Some other needs might be that towel to wrap up that bird to calm it when you're clipping its nails or when you're transporting it to keep its feathers damage free. Baby wipes can help with grooming. Same with those paper towels. They're awesome, awesome thing when you're at shows and achievement days to help with grooming. Blow dryers, again, with grooming to help dry them faster. And then the toothbrushes can be used on their feet. Same with the makeup wedges to apply extra oil if needed, which we'll talk about as well. The silk cloth can help with keeping their feathers down. Spray bottle can help if you have to do some kind of vet treatment or insecticide treatment, or again with the grooming. The nail clippers help to keep their toenails and spurs in a manageable length and not to claw you. The styptic powder can help be a blood stopping powder if you accidentally cut the quick when you're clipping their nails. The Q-tip and the baby and food grade oil also will help with grooming, and then all of these things have to go somewhere. So of course we have that toolbox or grooming bucket you can store everything in. And then the picture here at the bottom is of a specific chicken cage that you can use if you don't have a coop or for transportation. A dog kennel or cat kennel or carrier also works great to get those birds to and from shows. It doesn't have to be a chicken or poultry specific one if they will fit. And then of course we have our feed here. It's just a regular bag of feed we'll talk about in a little bit. And the feeders and waters, here we have some plastic ones, but you can also use metal. Whatever works best for you and your birds is a fantastic thing to do. And then here's some more on some banding. So depending on the state you're in, this is where you're really going to have to read your specific rule books. In North Dakota, testing with the NPIP program requires the birds to have a leg band with their flock and animal number given by the program or the tester. And some of the other state regulations require different types of leg bands, which Sam can touch on here in a second. With those pigeons have some specifics as well. And then you also have to find out those leg bands could be provided by your PET tester. You can get them from the hatchery, or you can order them online as well. They can be anything from these really fancy metal ones at the bottom, some plastic ones you can get at a farm supply shop. My personal favorite leg bands are the zip ties, because you can get them the perfect length for each of the birds, write the number on them with a Sharpie, and then just put a little bit of super glue in the seam to keep it from coming off.
And as Sarah said, it's going to vary by state. So most birds in most states, you can use things like zip ties or the hard plastic leg bands that we can order from supply companies. When it comes to pigeons and doves, things are a little bit more complex. They have a much more elaborate system of tracking birds and of registering birds. So like the National Pigeon Association, those bands, those NPA bands, those are actually seamless. So once they are on for good. So those bands can be used year after year, and they'll have a unique number on your pigeon, as well as the year that it was banded. So check again with your state, like Sarah mentioned. Make sure you read your rule book, and call your local 4-H agent, extension educator, and they can help you through those requirements of what you'll need to identify your birds.
Okay, so jumping in to talk a little bit about nutrition next. Each species or type of poultry will most likely have slightly different nutrient requirements. So if you're new to poultry, talk to your feed store, the hatchery you purchased your birds from, your extension agent, or even do some awesome online research on what the best types of feed might be. There's no one specific brand that's better than the other. The most important thing is that the animals are having their nutrient requirements met. Market birds or broilers are going to have a different protein requirement than an egg-laying bird will, so make sure you feed your project in their intended purpose for best results. You'll see the photo here is just of a feed label of a regular bag of feed, and at the top there you can see it's a complete chicken, starter, grower, and finisher, which means you can feed it to the bird for its entire life. It's also a complete turkey feed as well, so you can kind of see how you can get multi-purpose feed for multiple species. I also choose to always have been giving a pre-made packaged food, but if you choose to make your own, take care you're looking into those nutrient requirements as well. I know a lot of people can feed screenings or scratch grains from the elevator, and those can be used with feed, but they shouldn't be the only things that birds eat, and those birds who have a well-balanced diet of their essential nutrients will produce better. And so be sure to always practice good biosecurity when you're working with food, both at home and at the show. Don't borrow feeders or waterers or other items that'll come in contact with your birds and other birds. And then the most important nutrient is water, so make sure your birds always have access to clean, fresh water. Okay, so next we're going to talk about everybody's favorite creepy crawlies. We're going to talk through external parasites and pests of poultry. And as you can see, there's a ton of different varieties of mites that can affect poultry. So we have common mites, northern fowl, deep pluming, scaly leg, and chiggers. We want to do everything possible to keep birds free from these parasites. They can cause massive health issues, and they're really hard to eradicate and kill entirely. So you're always going to check for signs of mites on the birds and in the housing. You're going to check around the vent on the bird, under the wings, and on the legs. Mites can hide everywhere in cracks in the coops and housing, as well as in the bedding and nesting boxes. Some signs to look for if you think your birds might have mites will include inflammation or redness. Your birds might be itchy or preening excessively. You can see maybe parasite droppings. You can maybe actually see the little parasite mites running around on your birds. If you suspect these, look for red or black spots near the vent or under the wings, and you might even be able to run your hand along the roosts in the coop and you might find black spots. So wild birds are a common vector and carrier of these parasites, so work really hard to keep them out of bird housings and run. The average mite life cycle is 5 to 7 days, but during that time they can lay more than 100,000 eggs, and each type of mite or parasite will probably have a little bit of a different treatment. So make sure you talk to your veterinarian or extension agent to find out what type of mite might be affecting your birds and how to treat them. And again, these pests and parasites are very difficult to fully eradicate, so prevention is key. So you want to do this by making sure the coop and run are as clean as possible. You want to always make sure to be checking your birds for signs of external parasites and inspect your birds before you go to the show and after you come back from a show. So here's another harmful parasite for birds. These guys are poultry lice. These birds not only make birds uncomfortable and cause them to pick excessively at themselves, they can range in color from golden to yellow brown and clear, and they lay their eggs or nits in clusters, as you can see on this super cool photo. This is a picture of a really bad infestation of poultry lice. And some of the signs are similar to with other parasite problems. They're going to have red patchy areas on the skin. Their feathers aren't going to look in very good condition. They're going to look a little chewed up on the shaft of the feathers. There's going to be feather loss, droopy and flopped looking combs. The birds are going to be have a sickly appearance. There's going to be decreased egg production. The lice nits hatch in 4 to 5 days. They have a 12-day life cycle. But the good thing is it's not the same as the lice that people can get. It's only for poultry, and it spreads from bird to bird through close contact, but you cannot get it. And then consult your vet or extension agent for treatments. One preventative measure that birds enjoy is doing a dust bath and some fine sand, which can help to smother those lice. And if you do find some insecticide or treatment, please be sure to always read the label carefully to make sure you're using it correctly.
And something good to know with our parasites and our pests is, you guys, that these are really fairly common, that even the absolute best poultry caretaker in the world is sometimes going to get things like lice or some chiggers or something like that. So these are very common to happen. So you do your best to prevent, and when it does happen, then you go ahead and go forward with consulting that extension agent, talking to the veterinarian, making those treatment plans, and it makes an absolutely great talking point during showmanship or during your interview prior to the county fair or your state fair to discuss with the judge how you discovered this, how you worked through it, and how you were able to clean it up. So we've mentioned this term a few times in a couple of our slides, so we're just going to briefly kind of touch on it. The National Poultry Improvement Plan, which is kind of known as NPIP, oversees all of our Salmonella pylori or Salmonella typhoid testing, this PT rapid whole blood test. So all poultry, regardless of age, going to shows and or public exhibits, except for our doves and our pigeons, have to come from either they're an NPIP certified flock, which means they've been inspected and tested within the last couple of years and have remained clean, or they just have to get a test within 90 days of going to your fair or your exhibition. So the test, which is super simple, very quick, that's why they call it a rapid whole blood test, needs to be conducted by a certified PT tester, that pylori typhoid tester. Sometimes your extension agent might be a certified tester. Sometimes you might have a really wonderful project leader or somebody that's been in the project for a long time that has become a tester, that they can take care of this for you, and they can help you schedule a time to go ahead and take this test or get you connected with someone who can. So the test just takes a very tiny amount of blood from a vein. Typically we find it right up underneath that bird's wing, and we mix it with a special liquid that's called an antigen. And as we watch for that blood during that rapid whole blood test, within just a few seconds to over a minute, we can see if that test is positive or negative by how the blood clots on like a nice glass dish or a ceramic plate. So the test is super quick. It really doesn't hurt your birds. You do want to make sure when you have the test done that you want to have things like wet wipes or things like that, especially if we have white birds, just to make sure that their feathers stay clean, and that they don't get an infection of any kind. The paperwork's going to be filled out by that PT tester. They're going to send that in for you and take care of that. If you do have one that tests positive, that PT tester is going to walk you through every step of what happens next, whether it's contacting your state's Board of Animal Health or maybe putting the animal into observation for further testing, but they'll walk you through all those steps if that ever happens.
All right, I'm going to answer Abby's question just really quick in regards to the nationwide shortage of antigen. That is such a good question. Really go back and just ask your county agent and whatnot. Every state's going to be a little bit different, whether they have the Board of Animal Health has gone and put a waiver in. So just make sure you're reading your rule books, connecting with the show manager that you're exhibiting at and stuff like that, just to ensure you're on the right track. And you don't want to show up at the show and not get tested, because most likely you're not going to be able to allow to exhibit your animal. So great question.
Okay, so you guys have picked out your project, you've brought your birds home, we talked about the equipment you'll need, and now we'll talk a little bit more about the hands-on type activity. So first off, it's going to be how to properly carry your bird. You don't always want to hold them upside down and swing them around, because that'll cause some very stressed out birds. So how to properly carry them is you want to take your dominant hand, so if you're right-handed, move your dominant hand underneath the bird and place your middle and ring fingers between the legs. So if you look at that first picture there, you can see the middle fingers are between the legs and the index and pinky fingers are on the outside of the legs to help you support the legs. And then on that second picture, you can see your thumb should be able to wrap around to help stabilize. This depends on the size of your hand and the size of your bird. It might be super easy for you to hold your bird like this, and you might have a large Cochin rooster and it might be a little bit more difficult for you. And then if possible, you want to go ahead like that bottom picture is doing and support the back and the wings with your opposite hand to help keep that bird calm with that little bit of pressure. Also helps to hold the wings down. So training your bird. Here we have a very tame duck getting some snacks. So handle your birds often and get them used to you. Having a calm bird is a benefit in showmanship, and it'll give you the opportunity to earn some bonus points for having control over your project in the ring, and a tame bird is a calm bird. Snacks and treats like cracked corn and mealworms are a great way to get them used to you, and also can be a good motivator for them to enjoy seeing you. Some things to practice on are to have them stand on a table and pose like they might at a show, which we'll talk a little bit more on posing in a couple slides. Get them used to having their wings fanned and spread out. Go over their feet and toes. Get them used to having their combs and wattles touched as well. These are all going to be things you do during your showmanship routine, and the more used to it your bird is, the better it will be. Another important thing to practice is putting them into and taking them out of cages properly, which we'll talk about as well. And these all will help them to be prepared and calm come the show day. So now we're going to talk about grooming our birds or bathing our birds. So first off, you want to inspect them for dirt, external parasites, and waste to determine what type of grooming will be required. You don't necessarily have to give them a bath if they don't need one. If they're relatively clean, you can just take a damp washcloth just to clean over the top of their feathers, get any dust or residue off. If your bird is especially dirty, maybe it got into some mud out in the run, you're going to want to give it a full bath before the show. So with that, you can see here, it's the multi-dip bathing model. So you're going to have 2 buckets prepared, one with clean, warm water and have a rinse cup. And the other bucket is going to have a gentle soap like baby shampoo and then have that clean water. And they're going to gently dip the bird first into the clean water bucket, making sure their feathers get nice and wet, and then dip them into the soapy water bucket and gently massage and work out dirt and waste in their feathers and feet. And you put the bird back into the clean water bucket to rinse. Make sure you rinse it very, very thoroughly. If you have any soap residue, it will attract dirt, especially if you have a white chicken like the picture shows. Make sure you do a great job rinsing. A wet bird will take roughly 18 to 24 hours to dry thoroughly, even if you do towel and blow dry them. So make sure you do this ahead of time and think ahead for the show. You can towel them gently and blow dry them on a low, cool temperature after bathing. Make sure you don't damage any of the feathers or plumage. Don't rough up their feathers with the towel, and don't blast their feathers really hot with a blow dryer because that will dry them out. And the feet, toes, and shanks should also be cleaned, and that same soapy water and an old toothbrush works great. So say you just did the damp washcloth method, you can go ahead, and their feet tend to get a little bit dirtier than the rest of them. So going through with the soapy water and a toothbrush is a great way to wash their feet. So we're going to talk a little bit on grooming. So we mentioned why we need those toenail clippers. And so one thing we want to do is to make sure their toenails are neatly trimmed. You can use either dog or cat nail clippers, depending on what you're clipping. If you have a bantam or maybe you have some large spurs on a rooster that need to be clipped, make sure you have the appropriate tool and have that styptic powder and a paper towel to stop the bleeding if you end up cutting the quick too closely. Blood loss is extremely dangerous to birds. And then if you don't have that styptic powder, the quick stop or cornstarch will also stop bleeding. And some ways to do this effectively is wrapping your bird in that towel and covering the bird's head will help reduce the bird's anxiety and also protect yourself from flapping wings and flailing feet. You might need a helper for this depending on the size of the bird. Helpers are never a bad idea when we're grooming our animals. And on this illustration, you can see the proper way to clip the nail. Look for the quick, it's going to be the red nerve. If the nails are clear, you should be able to see it. And make sure you don't clip it and only trim the tip or the sharp point of the nail. And excessively long spurs and roosters can be clipped this exact same way. And then talking a little bit into the show day grooming, you've bathed your bird, you've clipped its nails, you're at the show. You can go ahead and use a cotton swab to lightly oil the feet, shanks, beak, comb, and wattle. You can use any type of food grade oil, baby oil, or Vaseline will work as well. And this helps them to shine and stand out in the ring. It's a really great contrast between the smooth, fluffy feathers, and then you have these great shiny beak and legs. And then you're going to do a brief cleaning of the feet with a damp washcloth, rag, baby wipes after you take the bird from the cage or directly before being judged. You want to make sure that their feathers aren't wet or damp and that you bathe them enough in advance. And so if you have a feather-footed breed like Cochins, make sure you take care of them earlier if at all possible. And so we've bathed our animals, we've gotten them to the achievement day, the fair, the show. We're finally ready. One thing to keep in mind is our cages offered. A lot of this can go into scheduling too on if your birds need to be there during the entire fair or just for the show. I know the county I grew up in provided cages. The county I work in now does not provide cages. So you really want to make sure you check with your local program to see what all you will need. Kind of tying into feed and nutrition, some of the cages might have feeders and waterers, or you might have to supply your own. And so a really great way to do that and to keep your birds well fed and have water available at all times is the method that's here, which is just a couple of plastic cups. You pop a hole in it with a hole punch, and then you fill it with feed and water as needed, and you zip tie it to the side of the cage. The birds don't throw their feeders and waters everywhere, and they are able to stay fed and watered during the show. Okay, so this is a North Dakota specific one here. So we're just going to talk on this for our North Dakota folks. So we're just going to read through this. This is what the Poultry Showmanship score sheet looks like. This isn't a requirement, more of a guide for you guys and for judges. You follow this as a guide to your showmanship routine. That first one there, you're going to go over your introduction, talking about your exhibitor number and your name. You're going to talk about the breed, a little bit on the breed origin, and a little bit on the breed history. You're going to go through the grooming and condition of the bird. You want to make sure it's in good health, it's good body condition, it's tame and manageable. And then the next list we're going to go through is your routine of the posing and showing them. This can be done in any order. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the order listed. You can go through the wings, making sure you mention the color pattern, condition of the feather. You're going to show the width of the back and the undercolor of those feathers. You're going to check the keel bone, breast, feather undercolor as well. You're going to display the feet, toes, and shanks. You're going to show the tail, proper carriage, and condition. And then you're going to place the bird on the table and pose for the judge. And then you're going to go ahead, and 20 points is on your appearance and attitude. So we're going to talk about our showmanship appearance at the end, as well as your speaking ability and knowledge of your project. And then just at the end, there's those 5 points are optional if they choose to ask you some showmanship questions. And so showmanship is really displaying your bird and your knowledge on the poultry project. You're not going to be docked for having a Wyandotte that has incorrect feather patterns in showmanship, as long as you're able to point those discrepancies out to the judge.
All right, so we get to the fair, we get to our achievement day, we've got everybody put in the cages. Now comes the hardest part, I think, and that's choosing which bird that we're gonna bring out for showmanship. I'm sure many of you guys are all showing more than one bird at the county fair or at your exhibition. Some of you may be even bringing 10 or 15 birds of different species coming into the fair. So sometimes it can be really difficult when it's time for showmanship. You're going to bring out just one bird out for showmanship. So deciding which bird that is kind of a big decision. So I like to say I judge quite often that showmanship can be won or lost prior to entering the ring, simply if you pick the wrong bird from all the entries that you're bringing. So one of the first things is you can show a male or a female in showmanship. It does not matter. You can choose. Make sure you select a calm bird. So maybe the one that you've practiced with the most at home, one that you know isn't going to be super flighty. For some states, you're going to be taking the bird out of the cage and displaying it for the judge. So if you're putting your hand in there to grab your bird to bring it out, we don't want the one that's going to fly like crazy and try to put their head through the top of the cage, and we'll have to calm them down. We want that nice, calm, kind of mellow bird that we're going to take out and handle and maneuver. Make sure you select a bird from in a breed from your entries that you're familiar with. One of the first questions a judge is going to ask in showmanship is, tell me about your bird. So you're going to need to be able to answer that question. So going through what class they belong in, what class they are in the standard of perfection, what variety this specific breed comes in, why you selected the breed that you did, when were they hatched. All that information is things that you're going to be able to share with the judge. So you're going to want to make sure you choose the bird from your entries that you know a lot about and that you can answer those questions with. And then top secret for selecting the right bird, this is coming straight from a judge. You lucky 100 that are in here, I'm going to give you a great tip. When you're picking which bird you're going to bring out for showmanship, you'll get huge bonus points if you choose the bird that the judge liked the best. So if you've gone through your show and you got grand champion bantam breeding rooster because he was just absolutely amazing and it sounded like the judge just fell in love with him, it's probably a good idea to bring that bird back out for showmanship because that judge is going to be really excited to see it again. And of course it blends well with if you know that bird the best or if you're really familiar with that breed. But knowing that you can select the best bird from your entries that you brought and you're really proud of that bird really goes a long way in showmanship. So showmanship in the ring, this can look quite different across quite a few of our states. It'll be interesting. You guys can throw it in the chat on how your state does a poultry show. So in North Dakota, they still use the table method. So there are tables laid out at the show, and you'll bring your bird up to the table and display them on the table where they will stand, where they will pose for the judge outside of a cage. In Minnesota and some other states, there are cages set up in the arena or in the ring. So if you have things like a pair of pullets or a breeding trio, all the birds come out together. And then you'll be asked one at a time to open your cage, and you and the judge will take the birds out, will examine them, and then put them back into the cage. So it'll be important if you're kind of nervous about how your poultry show will go, or if you haven't seen a poultry show in your particular state or county, make sure you ask your extension agent or your extension educator, and they can kind of give you the info to get you ready for whichever type of show you're going to be involved in. So then when you do get ready to go into the arena or into the show ring, or if you're one of those states that has a cage on the table and they're using cages right on the table in the arena, one of the first things you're going to be evaluated on in showmanship is removing your bird and putting your bird back into that cage. So the important thing to know is when you're removing your bird from any cage, and this could be the pet taxi that you brought the bird to the fair in, a rabbit carrier that you're using to bring birds in, or the pen that you're going to be using while at the fair and while your bird's being housed there, is that your bird always needs to come out of the cage head first. So when you put your arms in to grab your bird, you're going to maneuver your bird around until he's facing you, he or she is facing you, and you're going to put one hand on top, like our young man in the photo here, and gently kind of slide and take your bird out head first. The reason we always want to go in or out head first and in head first is we know when birds get a little spooked or if they get nervous, they'll spread out their wings. And when they extend those wings, the feathers can easily get caught in the sides of those wire cages that we're commonly using. So it can really wreak havoc on our feathers. It can damage wings, particularly in some of our waterfowl where the feathers are really, really strong. So it's really, really important and crucial that you're always taking your bird out head first and putting them back in.
Okay, so here, if you guys are in North Dakota or your county uses the table judging method, here's how you can pose your bird on the table. So what you're going to do is you are going to set the bird in front of you on the table. It can either be faced forwards towards the judge or to the side like the picture is showing. You want them to be calm but alert. So find that happy balance of them sleeping on the table and them trying to fly away. You can calm the bird down if needed by putting a hand on top or underneath. It's way better for you to have a hand on top underneath the bird than for you to try to have your bird stand there, not to touch it, and it to fly away. So make sure you have control of your bird at all times. Keep the bird standing. You can help it look more attractive with its head alert by poking underneath the wattles gently a little bit with your finger, and you want to make sure to keep it calm and controlled, and that practice makes perfect when posing your birds. And then going ahead on here with our showmanship routine, you're going to go ahead and display all the main body parts smoothly in any order, kind of like we talked on with that showmanship card. You have the head, wings, feet, back, and tail. And the really important thing when you're doing your routine is you really want to talk on the breed specifications according to the standard of perfection. So if your silver lace Wyandotte is supposed to have a pea comb, please be sure to tell that to the judge and say, this bird has a pea comb because it's a silver lace Wyandotte according to the standards. Talk about the coloring of all of the feathering, the wattles, the legs, the comb, even the eye color and beak color is extremely important to talk through here.
And it's important to know with your routine, the judge will kind of help you know when it's time to show off these certain body parts. So after the judge comes up and kind of introduces himself, him or herself to you, then they'll ask, can you display the head for me? Can you display a wing for me? And then you'll kind of move in through this routine.
And then this is kind of just going into a little bit more depth on our showmanship routine. You want to make sure you cover the standards for your breed in extreme detail. The judge will never be upset that you gave them too many details, and always discuss that breed standard. And this goes tying back into selecting your showmanship bird. Choose the one that's the tamest that you know the best, because you want to talk through those breed standards and the coloring of the feathers, shank or the legs, and their eyes, how they carry their tail, how they carry their head, as well as the feathering and feather patterns. And you're going to go through as well in the head. You're going to talk about the beak color, length and color of the wattles, color of the eyes, the type of comb. And then in the wing, you're going to fan out or spread out that wing to showcase the different feather groups. You're going to point out breed specifications, count the feathers, as well as point out the axil feather, that is where the primary and secondary flight feathers meet. And you're also going to talk about the correct color according to the breed and making sure it has the correct number of toes. Some of our fancy feathered footed breeds can sometimes have extra toes sneaking in there. You want to make sure to talk about if your breed and your bird you chose has the right number of toes.
All right, so while I'm getting this particular video up here of Kacha Bronco from Stark Billings, North Dakota, I am going to launch one more poll, just because even though it says we have 101 participants in this awesome poultry showmanship, I'm curious how many people are actually sitting in front of your screen, because it might be that we have more than 100 people in here. And then I am going to show this video while you guys are doing that, get that up here. And Katja is just kind of going through her routine, and she's kind of talking a little bit about how she's going to show her bird. And I asked her a few questions there. And so she could be a little bit more detailed in her presentation, but she's just going to give you kind of a brief understanding of how that is going to kind of look. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. All right, I'm going to end that polling. Pretty exciting. It looks like we definitely have more than 100 people on this call. So we are very well excited you guys are sharing this evening with us today. All right, so here we go.
Introduce your breed and wine race. My name is Katia Bronco, and I live in Richardson, North Dakota in Stark County, and I'm going to demonstrate poultry showmanship. So the first thing you want to do is introduce your breed and variety. So I have a partridge, wine.com, that's a bantam. You want to make sure that you have a good visual aid of your bird, so make sure it's standing up and that he's properly posed towards the judge like this. Next thing you want is you want to do your routine, and you can show the front side of the bird, left side of the bird, the rear side of the bird, and the right side of the bird. From there you want to identify parts, and when I go to identify parts, I usually start from the head, work my way back towards the back of the tail, and then down the legs. You want to show the wings, and the color pattern, and he is a partridge. Condition of feathers, he has some shafting in him. You want to check for lice and mites, anything that could just lower the quality of your bird's feather and condition.
And where do you check for those mites?
Lice and mites can be found back here under the vent and sometimes underneath the wing also. There. You want to show the width of back. Doing this.
So you just put your fingers on it?
Pretty much right back here you can feel the widest part of the back. Undercolor, which his should be more of a he's black or steel colored underneath, but as he is older he does have some white underneath him, and that varies on the breed, and that's something that you should check within the standard for it. Next thing you would want to show would be the feet, the toes, and the shanks. So you want to make sure the judge gets a good look at the feet, and that if you have a 5-toed breed or anything unique, a feather-footed breed, make sure you mention that.
Oh, I do remember that, because he said the feathers should come out more on the toe.
Yep. Show him the toes. And then show the shanks, which is right here. And on feather-legged breeds, you should move the feathers somewhat off to the side as much as you can so that the judge can get a good look at it. So you want to mention tail with the proper carriage should be on the bird, which is another thing you would need to check within the standard.
And how do I know what a standard is?
This is the standard. You can buy it from the American Poultry Association, and it's a really good tool if you're going to show poultry. It has everything you need to know in it. So mention the condition. So this bird, for being an older cock, he's in pretty good condition right now. He does have some feathers he's growing back in his wings. So placing the bird on the table and posing it for the judge is really important. Most judges want you to be able to place your bird on the table and be able to stand back with one finger under the beak and hold the bird. You want the bird standing up. You have to really try on some, and others will stand up by themselves.
And how do you make them try to stand up?
When they're sitting down and they won't stand up, I usually just pick them up again, gently put them back down, and hold them there for a little bit, and just see if they'll stand on their own by then. You always want to make sure that you have a good appearance. Your hair is brushed, you have a clean shirt, clean pants, you don't want to be looking dirty or messy. And then always speak clearly and loudly and at the judge to make sure that they hear everything you say. And they ask you to repeat something, politely repeat it. And if you don't fully hear them, ask them to repeat something, as that can mess you up sometimes. And at the end, you should always ask if the judge has any questions.
And can you show me where like the kneel bone and breastbone is?
Yeah, hens are more obvious. The heel is back here. That's checks to see if a hen is laying. And breastbone runs all the way through the middle, and you can feel it. That's a good way that judges will be able to tell if your bird is getting properly fed or not. And if it's not, they will comment on that and most likely ask you what you are feeding your bird.
All right, so that was Cacio Branca again, one of our North Dakota 4-H'ers from Stark Billings. She loves poultry and is really good about working with others in regards to poultry, so definitely thank her for that video. And from there, we will move on to our next slide. I like the clap, clap. Thank you.
So
All
one
right.
of the, oh, sorry, Leanne. So one of the main things that I've seen popping up in the questions is, what do I need to know and what is the judge going to be asking me? And so this next section is going to be all about that. Sarah and I are going to lead you through exactly what a judge is going to usually ask of you and ask for knowledge and what you might need to study up on.
Okay, so starting off, we've talked a lot about your showmanship routine and displaying the different parts of the bird. We're gonna go through what those parts are. Just like with your pets or even your livestock, it's super important and showing good herdsmanship to know the parts of your animal. This is especially true in poultry showmanship. And since a large part of your showmanship routine is to point out aspects and parts to your judge, it's super helpful to get to know them. So the judge might ask you to point out these specific parts, and if they ask you a question, always try to answer them as truthfully and honestly as you can. So you're going to go through and study the main body parts. You're going to study the types and locations of the feathers. You're going to make sure you know the correct eye and beak color for the breed, as well as any potential disqualifications. So over on the left here, we have our chickens and the different parts. We're not going to go through them all today. We're going to break it down a little bit and hopefully give you guys the tools you need to go out and memorize and study them on your own. So next here, we're gonna break it down and look over the head and neck areas. And some of these are gonna vary according to the species you show. So not every animal is gonna have a snoot, a bean, or a dewlap. Just our turkeys, ducks, and geese are gonna have those. And however, the comb, nostril, beak, wattles, earlobe, the neck, the fringe of the eyelid, and the nape are gonna be present on most species of birds. And you can see here, the different species are very similar, but they again have those differences. And so this ties back into, again, knowing your project animal. So this one is just for our chicken friends. So this is an example of the different comb types of chickens. Each breed will have a little bit of a different comb, and so you want to make sure to have the correct type and color when you're displaying it to the judge. And some common ones on here are single, rose, and the pea comb. And you're going to go through, and one disqualification that happens a lot is single combs tend to freeze off in North Dakota winters, and so your bird might have a disqualification, but if you share it with the judge, you'll be in a better place. So there's the types of combs. So moving on to the front of the bird and the legs, you can see this young showman showcasing the different parts of her project. And these are all parts that should be included in a showmanship routine, going through the front of the wing, the breast area, breastbone, and the keel, going over the ring coverts and the coverlet feathers, going the shank of the leg, the spur, the toes. Some things you want to look for on the feet and toes especially is, are there any parasites or broken toes? And are there any missing toenails? Are they clean? Are they trimmed? Something to keep in mind here. And so when you're going through, make sure you know your breed standards again. And looking into our last part of our bird breakdown here, we're going to look into the back, body, and rear. You'll see here the showman is displaying the cape or hackle feathers in that top picture, and the back, vent, and tail feathers on the bottom picture. The body feathers and down should all be in a good condition and be as free from broken feathers as possible. You're going to want to make sure if you have a rooster that all of the sickle feathers are present. And that last photo, she's doing something pretty interesting. She's actually palpating the back of the bird, and this is done in egg production type breeds to gauge the abdominal capacity. And a larger capacity means that you might have a higher producing bird. And so going through here with our wing feathers, you can see there's a lot of different types of feathering to our wings that you can go through. And you're going to fan out the wing and point out the different types of the feathers. So our cover feathers are the top ones at the top of the wing, which are going to be the marginal, lesser, median, greater, and primary cover feathers. And then our flight feathers are going to be the secondary, which are going to be closer to the bird's body. The axial feather is going to divide the secondary and primary flight feathers. And then finally, we have our primary flight feathers, which arches from the middle of the wing all the way out to the tip. I know Sam was going to talk on some disqualifications as well, but one thing I want to touch on first here is if you look at those pictures on the bottom, there you can see two silver laced Wyandottes, but you should be able to see a massive difference in their feathering. So one disqualification would be you might have the most beautiful, most tame bird ever, but if you show it in a breeding class and the feather pattern is not correct, you will be docked. And so on the right, you'll see a silver laced Wyandotte that has the correct feather patterning and the correct lacing width on the feathers. And then on the left there, you can see that darker bird does not have enough white and the lacing is too thick on those feathers.
So some of the other things that we see really common for disqualifications, and they vary by breed. Some breeds, as Sarah mentioned already, have a tendency to have some disqualifications with extra toes or odd feathering patterns. So on the head, especially for those of us in colder climates like North Dakota, Minnesota, Montana, we're going to have some frostbitten comb tips or wattles. If they're not, in properly heated areas for the winter, we can have little tips kind of missing right off the tops of combs. Lopped combs, overbite beaks, crossed beaks, wry or crooked necks, same thing with our tails, excessively coarse wrinkled wattles, or anything that would kind of measure up to have lesser or fewer points than what the breed standard recommends. So for those that have a single comb, which is probably our most common comb that we see across all breeds of chickens, that single comb is supposed to have 5 points. And if you go out to your barn or to your shed or your little coop to look at your chickens, it's kind of rare that we really get one with only 5 points. It's very common that they have multiples. And then the feathers in the body, as Sarah pointed out, broken feathers, incorrect feather patterns, and then being under or over conditioned on their body. So one of the questions I know I saw is bounced into our chat box a few times is breeds to start with, or what would we recommend to start with? A lot of times disqualifications are more common in birds that are patterned. So if you're brand new to the poultry project and just learning about this, solid colored birds are your friends. So things like buff Orpingtons that are solid buff, black rosecombs that are solid black, white egg layers like leghorns, all of those that don't have a very particular pattern are a lot easier to match and tend to have less disqualifications. And then that back and rear, like a prolapsed vent, because that's going to point to maybe some health issues we have to work on, split or wry tails, and then anytime we're missing some of those big main tail feathers, that usually means we're going to be docked at least one ribbon placing because they just aren't in full plumage and they're not showing their best. So resources to help you further your knowledge. So those were just some of the basic questions that a judge is going to ask. Things like body parts, so that anatomy, when birds were hatched, different varieties of birds, or what class in the American Standard of Perfection that your bird falls. One of my best memories showing poultry at the Minnesota State Fair when I was in the showmanship finals, and I thought I had it down and I was good to go. And the judge came by and he asked me what breed of bird was standing in the cage next to me. And I looked over and it was a pigeon, and I had no clue. And all I could tell him was, I think it's a pigeon. So to further your knowledge, you're really going to want to know a little bit about all species of poultry and to be able to speak on that. So some great resources. The U.S. Poultry and Egg Association has really awesome little kits that you can go through and some worksheets that you can work on. The National 4-H Poultry Curriculum, that most of your county offices will have at least one copy, or they can help you purchase a copy, full of puzzles, projects, tasks that'll kind of lead you through the poultry project. And then certain associations, for us, the Minnesota Turkey Growers Association also has activities on their website that you can work on. And then we have other ones, other associations, things like Pheasants Forever or waterfowl associations that'll provide lots of different educational resources and activities that you can participate in to learn more about poultry. And as our wonderful North Dakota 4-H showman mentioned in her video, showmanship is kind of all about you. And Sarah mentioned it right away at the beginning of the presentation tonight, that showmanship is about you. It's about your knowledge and how you present that bird to the judge. We want that bird to look its best, and that's kind of your responsibility. So that's what you're going to be evaluated on. So depending on your state, of course, you will have a 4-H dress code. So for some states, this is dressed in dark jeans or black jeans, a white shirt, or just perhaps a clean shirt or show apparel. In North Dakota, the dress code is that you need to have either a solid white, green, gray, or yellow shirt with the 4-H emblem prominently displayed on the front. Minnesota suggests that you wear dark jeans and a shirt that is contrasting to the bird that you're going to be showing. So if you have a white bird, we kind of suggest that you don't wear a solid white shirt, just so that you can kind of see that bird up against it. Or if you choose to wear an actual show coat to kind of protect your underclothes, that is appropriate as well. Just like anything we do in 4-H, any sort of evaluation or judging, we don't want you to wear a cap because we don't want you to hide your lovely face from us when we're judging you and when we're talking to you. Just like your parents, I'm sure, have preached over and over, make sure you have closed-toed shoes on. Anytime we're working with livestock of any kind or working out in the barn. And then especially with poultry, sometimes we suggest long sleeves just because those claws can be a little sharp. even if you've trimmed or filed them properly. So anytime a bird gets spooked, we want to make sure your arms are well protected. So as the exhibitor, you should have basic knowledge of your project. So again, the age of your birds, the breed that you have, what you're feeding them, and how you're taking care of them. Part of being a good showman is avoiding crowding your animals. So avoid kind of shoving your birds into that last space at the showmanship table. Maybe wait a heat to come up for the next one. Help another exhibitor open their cage or hold a door if they need to be. If your bird does become unruly, and especially with poultry, this can just tend to happen, that birds get a little flighty or they get a little nervous. You're going to earn extra points in showmanship just by remaining calm. So deep breaths, nice and calm. If your bird is acting up in the cage, just take your hands out, take a breath, wait for them to settle down, and then try again. And just remember that showmanship is a learning experience. I don't think there was ever a show that I've ever judged or participated in where I didn't come away learning something new. So there's no failures in showmanship. We're just always learning, and there's always going to be something that you can take away after the experience.
So just some final thoughts here. Here are some of my favorite poultry projects that I've worked on through the years. And also a fun fact, when I was in 4-H, Samantha was actually my poultry judge for some of my last couple years. So I've really gotten to work with Sam in a whole new light recently, which is a super awesome opportunity. And so one of my favorite things that I did in the poultry project is just picking something that you're passionate about and never stop learning. I learn things every time I have a conversation about poultry. Even putting presentations like this together, you always have something new to learn. And if you're passionate about it, you should always have that desire to keep learning.
All right, and final thoughts for me. Knowledge is so much better when it's shared. My favorite part of the poultry project is sharing what I know and teaching others. And that started when I was a 4-H'er. The young lady, the young blonde gal with the glasses on, was in my 4-H club and wasn't able to have birds at her home because she lived in town. So she came out and used mine for a number of years. And my favorite part was being able to watch her succeed and her learn. And pretty soon when the person you're teaching is stumping you on questions because they're just so excited about the project, it just makes it all worth it. So no matter what you learn, make sure you're sharing it with others. This is going to be the perfect year to do that, where we're maybe all kind of stuck at home or we're isolated from each other. So what you learned tonight, present that at a club meeting or for school for show and tell or as part of a school project. Just make sure you keep sharing that knowledge so others can learn too.
Wow, guys, that was so cool. I learned so much from there, and I can't wait to share it with somebody else. Super informative. Well, we are going to take some questions that you guys have been doing such a good job at putting in the chat box. I launched a poll just to see, was this useful to you guys? I know it was useful to me. And so I've had some people recording your questions, and they're going to go ahead and ask those now so our presenters can answer those for you guys.
Well, thanks, Leanne. And I've got a few questions here for both Sam and Sarah. So we're going to go way back and start kind of at the beginning of your presentation this evening. One of the first questions was, and I know you didn't have a picture of it, but can you exhibit a peacock?
All depends on your state. Some of those states that allow for a show and hobby class, you can bring a peacock. There were some peacocks at Minnesota County Fairs last year in show and hobby. So it's all going to depend on your state, and just check with your 4-H office and with your county fair superintendents, and they can help you understand that. Thanks, Sam. Moving into when you started to talk about the parasites on the animals, there was an individual that asked, how many mites can my bird actually get?
They're so minuscule and tiny, and they lay 100,000 eggs in their 7-day lifespan. So hopefully that helps to give you a bit of an idea of how many they can actually have. They're smaller than the tip of a pen. There's so many you couldn't even count them necessarily if you have a really bad infestation in your flock.
So can the chicks, the younger ones, get the mites too?
If they get exposed to it, they can.
Okay. So is it okay to show a chicken that is older than a year or two?
This will all depend on your state's requirements. So in North Dakota, Sarah, you'll have to remind me, it's been a while, that is okay, because they can be over a year for some classes. However, in like Minnesota, they have to be from that current year's hatch. So it's all gonna depend on your state, how many years you're allowed to show that bird.
And in North Dakota 4-H, kind of like Sam mentioned, we do have that bird or hen over 1 year. So you can show a bird over a year in North Dakota. But again, kind of the theme is make sure you check with your local state and county rules.
Okay, so now we're starting to prepare these birds for exhibition. And you talked about bathing and cleaning. So what kind of soap can I use? People were asking and chatting. Using horse shampoo, cattle soap, dog soap, Dawn dish soap. What are your recommendations there?
So in my experience, I'll go, and then I'm sure Sarah has her favorites too. Everybody has a brand or a favorite. Any type of dish soap, preferably the ones that say they're gentle on your hands. It just means they're going to be a little bit more mild on the skin of your bird, and they're not going to dry out the skin or the feathers. I showed a lot of white birds for years, and one of my favorite things to use was kind of bluing shampoo that you can get either from cattle or from horses, that's supposed to kind of make whites whiter. The key with that is that you don't let them soak very long in the water, otherwise you get purple chickens, at least until you wash them again, because that blue will set in. I've also used a little bit of spray kind of spot detergent. For really hard to get stains on certain feathers, you can spray a little bit and really rub it in with your fingers. And then I follow the same approach Sarah did with the 2-bucket rule. And then sometimes, especially for blackbirds, I'd have a third pail with a little bit of vinegar in it, just to add a little bit of extra shine, especially for those darker kind of plumaged birds.
Do you think that we should provide washing for those animals at a younger age just so they get more accustomed to it?
I wouldn't say so. I'd say you want them to remain clean. So kind of like Sam was saying, you don't have really stubborn stains. But if you wash them too often, it's not a cattle project where you want to wash them and blow them every day, because you will dry out the feathers. But making sure that they're clean and manageable. Maybe I bathe my chickens a couple times a year just before show, and maybe Sam did something different with hers, but
nope, that's pretty much how I've gone about it. Usually some of my procedures that I go through is with waterfowl, of course. If you give them a kiddie pool full of water, they will be spotless in a matter of about 10 minutes. So you can just let them have at it. With some of my more downed poultry, so chickens, turkeys, those type. Usually a week before I want to bathe my birds, I like to put them on clean shavings, because it's amazing what some of those really fine, clean shavings will do. It'll really help take a lot of the dirt off before you even get to a bath. So usually if you're changing out your bedding frequently, which is going to help you reduce the risk of mites and keep your birds a lot cleaner, you really shouldn't have to bathe them very frequently.
Okay, so now we talked about the bathing. Now we're going to talk about clipping some toenails. So how often should the nails be clipped, and at what age that should you start clipping those nails? And then along with that, can I clip duck nails?
So I'd say it's kind of tied into the bathing of if you can see you have hens over a year and their nails are really starting to get long, you can clip them more than a couple times a year for the show. But I just clipped mine right before the show. It caused more stress on the bird to clip them and potentially cut them too short versus just making sure that they're manageable. And so you really just want to make sure, you might not even have to clip the nails depending on the age of your bird. If it has shorter nails, you just want to get rid of any sharp points and make sure that the nails aren't too long where it looks like it's interfering with how the bird walks. And Sam's gonna have to answer the duck nails part.
With waterfowl especially, their nails tend to be shorter, but they're no less sharp. So ask permission from your mom or from your grandma first, or have them buy you a cheap nail file. And I think sometimes just filing down those really sharp points reduces that you don't have the stress of actually clipping the nail, but you can also kind of dull off those ends so it's a little bit more pleasant to work with them and handle in practice.
Okay, thank you on that. Before we move into some other stuff, we're going to stay with the cleaning aspect. How do I clean the beak?
Please do not dunk your chicken's head underwater. Again, if you have waterfowl, that's a fantastic way. Like Sam would say, give them a kiddie pool. But if you take that damp washcloth and just remove any dirt, and then if there's a little dirt inside the nostril area, to just take a slightly damp Q-tip and just gently get it out of there. That should take care of cleaning the beak. Unless it's been recently eating, there shouldn't be a lot of debris hanging on there.
Okay, so now we're moving on, we're going on, we're getting ready, we're going to the show. What kind of cages can I transport my birds in? Can I use rabbit cages?
You can use anything that's going to fit in your vehicle. My ultimate favorite thing is those little hard little plastic kind of pet taxis or pet carriers that you can get for cats or for dogs. You can pick them up fairly cheap on yard sales, and everybody seems to have one sticking out in the back of their barn or in the garage. They work great. Super easy to clean when you're done. And they also, because they have a solid base, they're not going to allow things like duck grease or droppings to fall onto the floor of mom or dad's car. So that's always something to consider. Some rabbit cages can be fine. You want to kind of make sure that the wire is thickly woven enough so that the holes are small enough that birds can't have their feet fall through, or their toes can't get caught inside the wires as you're kind of lifting and setting them back down.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, and I say that for the other people that have been monitoring the chat questions, see if I missed anything. So I just got two left. Can I show a bird with clipped wings?
Ask your local extension agent. There may be a class in your county for either a pet or a hobby bird that you can showcase. You can still show that bird and just talk at length about its breed and everything you know about that bird. But it's going to depend on your county and your state.
Okay, and the last question that I have is, and it's popped up a few times, and both of you referenced there's some great reference books out there. Can we get those reference books on Amazon, or where would you suggest that we look for those reference books for?
So you can find a lot of them on Amazon. You have to go and look. They might go in and out of stock. You might also want to make sure you're getting the right edition. So the newest edition is going to be what your judge is likely referencing. And Samantha had a good point earlier. I'm not sure if everyone caught it, but the American Standard of Perfection has almost all of the information in the book available online if you do some digging. So instead of buying a guide like the American Standard of Perfection is a little bit on the expensive side. So it's around, I think Sam had said $90 to $120 usually for this book. And so if you're able to find that information online, just starting out to give you some ideas that might be better. But then the direct websites we referenced, the resources would also have those resource references available.
Yep. And the standard of perfection comes in two types. You can get it in color, and you can also, I believe, still get it in black and white. So the black and white edition is quite a bit less expensive. So that's another option. If you're really, really serious about the poultry project and it is just what gives you life when you wake up in the morning, the standard of perfection is an amazing investment. It's something you're going to use for years. My oldest edition is held together with a duct tape, but I just will not give it up yet, so I had to buy a new edition. Another place that you can find them, because you can find them on Amazon or straight from the National Poultry Association, you can also sometimes find them on eBay. So if somebody's trying to get rid of a one past edition, sometimes you can pick them up there, or at even used bookstores. Quite often you can find those, or used textbook stores. You can find copies of the Standard of Perfection.
So, ladies, we talked about poultry and chickens. What if I want to go beyond that? Do you have any guidance if I want to show eggs? What can I do to try to make sure that the eggs that I exhibit are attractive and high quality?
I guess, can I answer this one, Sarah? The poultry judging contest was one of my favorites. That's what I participated in all the time growing up. So eggs is a great way to expand your learning in the poultry project. So depending on your state, typically you're going to want to have either 6 eggs or a dozen eggs that you're going to bring in for exhibition. So you're going to place them in just kind of an egg carton unless otherwise instructed. And some of the things you want to look for is you want to make sure that all of your eggs are as uniform as possible. So they're all the same color, they're all the same size. You want to look for things, defects like light colored shells, cracks, calcium deposits. So we're really looking for those absolutely perfect smooth eggs. And then it's as simple as finding 12 that look identical, which is very difficult, but it's a great way to challenge yourself in the project. And you want to have those eggs probably about as fresh as you can get, while still being still being able to get them uniform to bring them to the fair.
Okay, I'm going to go back to go back to the standards book. There was somebody had chatted in. Can you win one of those books? And then how often does a new edition come out? Do you know anything about those two things?
There are some contests. I've seen some counties or some states that award the Standard of Perfection as kind of in lieu of a trophy. So you might want to check with your state fair to see what they provide. How often does a new edition come out? Typically right now it's about 5 to 6 years in between. However, there are changes that are made right after the book is published. My brand new edition that I just bought, I believe, is 1 year old, and it came with an insert of 2 other breeds that have now been recognized. So you can find all those updated breeds or any updates to the edition are all on that National Poultry Association website.
Well,
go ahead. Sorry, Kurt. I saw it pop up right away that you can find an older version that you can download sometimes from different libraries. I've found those as well. Just make sure that you've got the American Standard of Perfection and not the British Standard of Perfection.
Well, as the
standard, real quick. So a lot of times your county extension office might have a copy for you as well. I know I have a copy in my office, and if any of my 4-H families have a question on something, they're totally able to come in and check that book out. So again, check in with your extension office to see if that's something you can look at before you have to purchase.
Thank you, ladies, Sarah and Samantha. And I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Scarpe because I am out of questions, and I believe Dr. Hoffman and Lindsay are out at the same time with me. So, Dr. Scarpe?
Well, thank you, guys. We have one last question here. What if you have tiny bantam eggs?
I'm guessing they're asking if they could bring those as an egg exhibit. You certainly can. I don't think anybody's ever going to tell you not to. If that's how you want to display your knowledge, go for it. I think that's a great idea, Diaz family. However, you know, sometimes they're just not going to compare to the high efficiency egg producers, you know, like those Leghorns that are going to provide those large or extra large eggs. So if the judge doesn't appreciate them, you can take them home and make the world's cutest deviled eggs, and it'll still all be a great experience.
I love that. Well, I just want to thank all the people that have really put in the creative energy and effort to put this together. I've had a lot of comments in the chat just towards you guys as the presenters, Samantha and Sarah, just thanking for such an informational presentation. So know that this thing was genuinely loved. And definitely thank you to Kurt, Dr. Hoffman, Lindsay, for collecting all those questions and helping us be organized in that. And behind the scenes is Scott. He is the tech expert, so he's recording this and doing all sorts of stuff. So genuine thanks to him as well. And thank you guys for joining us tonight. Without you guys, we don't have a presentation. So thank you all for letting us share this expert wisdom with you guys. We sure appreciate you joining us. And with that, we hope you guys stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day.